I went to my daughter's rehearsal dinner, thinking it would be a lovely and joyous occasion, but instead, she ended up publicly referring to her stepmother as the person who truly brought her up in life. She introduced this woman to her soon-to-be in-laws as the one who shaped her, then effectively threw me out of the event by calling me a pathetic nobody, and declaring that she felt ashamed of me. I am a 48-year-old mother who desperately needs fresh eyes on this entire sequence of events involving my 25-year-old daughter's pre-wedding celebration. All of this has been weighing heavily on my mind and heart, to the point where I lie awake at night wondering whether I did something terribly wrong in the way I reacted, or in how I tried to protect myself. The entire situation feels surreal and deeply painful, and I question if my decision-making that evening, and in the aftermath, was truly justified, or if I crossed a line that I might regret. Let me provide some backstory, so everyone can understand the layers here. I was married to my daughter's father, a 50-year-old man, until our divorce when my daughter was around 10. Just 1 year after our split, he remarried, and his new wife, my daughter's stepmom, whom I'll refer to as S, made a point of positioning herself in my daughter's life as the ultimate nurturer, or what she liked to portray as a supermom figure. In my heart, I really did try to co-parent with as little conflict as possible, but there was a constant undercurrent of tension. Her dad, blessed with a substantially higher income than I could ever hope to have, never missed a chance to highlight the difference in our financial standing. Because of those disparities, my daughter gradually came to prefer spending time with her father and stepmother, which then manifested in resentment toward me for failing to offer her the same luxurious opportunities, or advantages. Describing our mother-daughter bond as turbulent barely scratches the surface. It was, and continues to be, an incredibly difficult road. Still, I poured my energy into remaining present in her life and showering her with as much love and support as I could manage, holding on to the hope that one day our relationship might strengthen. Moving forward to the rehearsal dinner, an event I had genuinely been looking forward to, I felt a spark of happiness, because I believed we were on relatively good terms at that point. After all, I'd been actively helping with various aspects of her wedding planning and had contributed financially in whatever ways I could. Leading up to this moment, though, my daughter had started to seem quite distant. She often let my calls go to voicemail, or took forever to respond to my texts, only to sound totally uninterested when she finally spoke to me. In spite of these warning signs, I still believed that the rehearsal dinner offered a golden opportunity for some heartfelt reconnect. I imagined that it could be a safe space for us to clear the air, to sort out the tension that was brewing in the background, and to perhaps bond before her big day. I clung to the hope that her wedding could serve as a meaningful new chapter for our fractured relationship. However, looking back, it's painfully obvious how naive that hope was, because what actually happened at the rehearsal dinner was far from anything I ever expected. It truly shocked me to my core. During the dinner itself, my daughter stood up in front of everyone, her soon-to-be in-laws, friends, and relatives, and began introducing key people in her life. Everything seemed fairly normal until she reached her stepmother. Suddenly, her entire face lit up with admiration, and she announced with overflowing joy, "This is S, the woman who raised me." She never once turned her eyes in my direction, and she seemed so proud and overjoyed as she toasted her stepmother. That moment felt like a cold, stinging slap across my face, because in my mind, it was me who had been there for her in countless ways, and I had always believed I raised her. Yet in that instant, my part in her life might as well have been invisible. All around me, I could see the guests smiling, nodding, and lifting their glasses in agreement, as if to confirm that her stepmother was the only maternal figure. I did my best to stay collected. Even though my heart felt like it was caught in a vice, I forced myself to remain silent, swallowing my tears and reminding myself again and again that it was her special night. I convinced myself that my own pain was secondary, and I tried desperately not to attract attention or cause any uncomfortable scene. Later that same evening, once most of the formalities were winding down, my daughter approached me and asked if we could talk somewhere private. I momentarily felt hopeful. In my mind, perhaps she wanted to address what she had just done in front of everyone, or maybe she wanted to apologize, or offer some sort of clarification for her hurtful remark. Sadly, my optimism was entirely misplaced. Instead of an apology or thoughtful explanation, she launched into a verbal attack that was brutal and unfiltered. She declared that she had never even wanted to extend an invitation for me to come to her wedding at all, and that she considered me nothing more than a pathetic nobody who brought her shame. She followed that with an instruction for me to leave immediately and not come back. In that split second, I felt a gaping hole in my chest, as though the air had been knocked clean out of my lungs. Words fail to fully capture the depth of devastation and betrayal I experienced right then. It was an emotional blow I could never have anticipated from my own child, and it left me feeling like my world was crumbling under my feet. Never in my wildest nightmares did I imagine that my own flesh and blood could speak to me with such venom. There was raw contempt dripping from every syllable that she hurled in my direction, and I found myself slipping into a state of self-doubt, almost believing I truly was as worthless as she had claimed. It cut deeply because I'd spent so many years making an effort to stay connected with her, providing emotional support and trying to be present, even during the times she pushed me away. Yet again, though, I refused to spark a public argument or do anything that might add more chaos on the eve of her wedding. Instead, I left quietly, forced to retreat to the seclusion of my hotel room. By the time I slid that key into the door, I felt like a bundle of raw nerves and shattered hope. Words can hardly express how utterly destroyed I felt inside. It was a deep heartbreak that seemed to echo through my entire being. That night, I couldn't manage even a moment of rest. My mind spun in relentless circles, dissecting every second of the rehearsal dinner, from her introduction of her stepmother to the scathing confrontation in private. As I lay awake, I also revisited all the times my daughter had been sharp-tongued with me in the past. She'd never been timid when it came to voicing whatever came to her mind, no matter how wounding it might be. In previous instances, I could attempt to shrug it off as adolescent rebellion or irrational teenage attitude. But this incident felt monumentally different. She was now a grown adult, entirely aware of her words and intentions, and thus every barb she threw was purposeful. There was a maturity to her cruelty that hurt more deeply than any argument would ever had before. It left me feeling not only heartbroken, but also bewildered by the extent of her disdain. I found myself completely at a loss, unable to comprehend the source of my daughter's apparent loathing toward me. My tears felt endless, and the sense of inadequacy grew until it almost swallowed me whole. At some point in that overnight haze, I concluded that the healthiest option for both of us, especially if she found my presence so appalling, would be to remove myself from the picture. I gathered my belongings, eyes still blurry with tears, and resolved to leave at first light. Perhaps, I reasoned, it would ease the tension if I was no longer around as an unwelcome presence. Although it caused me immeasurable pain, it seemed like the only step I could take to protect what remained of my own emotional well-being. Early the next morning, I officially checked out of the hotel, lugging my suitcase and other items to my car. My emotions were still raw, but I was determined to head home. Just as I climbed into the driver's seat, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my daughter, and her voice was full of panic and sobs. She was almost incoherent, struggling to tell me that her father and her stepmother had effectively turned their backs on her that very morning. They had given her official paperwork indicating that, in their eyes, she was no longer part of the family. This shocking revelation meant she'd be cut off financially and disinherited from any family wealth or trust. Essentially, they intended to sever all economic support for her from that day forward, leaving her in a precarious situation she'd never imagined. The reality of my daughter's predicament was also tied to her educational choices. She had enrolled in a tremendously expensive university program for a degree she never ended up using. When the time came to pick a college, she was initially quite unsure of what she really wanted to study or pursue. I had gently suggested a more budget-friendly strategy, recommending that she spend her first couple of years at a local community college to explore her interests and save money before transferring to a university better aligned with her eventual goals. But her stepmother, S, was absolutely determined that my daughter start at a big-name university immediately after high school. S promised her that she would cover the costs for any institution, so long as my daughter agreed to earn a degree. S even went to great lengths to show off glossy brochures for very prestigious and very expensive universities, enticing my daughter to dream big with the promise of full financial backing. Naturally, I didn't have the monetary means to match SS offer, so I tried explaining my limitations to my daughter as clearly and lovingly as I could. Originally, my ex-husband and I planned to split our daughter's tuition, but if she was hell-bent on picking one of these outrageously pricey schools that S championed, it would be impossible for me to contribute in the same way. My daughter, however, interpreted my financial constraints as evidence that I never supported her desire to attend college in the first place. She kept insisting that if I truly cared about her future, I would have performed miracles the way her stepmother did. She also hinted repeatedly that my supposed jealousy of S was behind my inability to help. Of course, that wasn't true at all. S was spending my ex-husband's wealth, which I simply did not have access to. I pleaded with my daughter to see reason, but she brushed me aside and enrolled in one of those highly expensive universities far away from our home state, effectively distancing herself from me in every sense. On top of that, at her father's suggestion, she took out a sizable student loan, and then cut off contact with me entirely for 4 whole years. As part of the original agreement, her father and S had pledged to take responsibility for her student loans after graduation. Their reasoning for recommending she take out the loan in her own name was simply that they didn't have immediate access to enough cash for tuition at the time, but they assured her they would handle the burden eventually. Over the years, they had indeed been doling out regular sums of money to help her manage those debts, gradually reducing the balance. Now, however, with their sudden decision to disown her, they also stopped making those payments. The responsibility for that substantial loan, which had not yet been paid off, fell squarely and unexpectedly on her. She found herself with no personal savings whatsoever, having never held down a job. Her entire lifestyle had been underwritten by a comfortable monthly allowance from her father. With that financial tap now turned off, she had no feasible way to take care of her debt, especially since her fiancé was far from wealthy and lacked the means to take on her obligations. My daughter was absolutely distraught, sobbing as she described how betrayed she felt by her father and stepmother. In her mind, I was suddenly her sole lifeline, the only person who might somehow fix the mess she found herself in. She pleaded with me to reach out to her father and S, hoping I could persuade them to revoke their decision and keep supporting her. When I calmly refused, she escalated, employing emotional blackmail to make me feel obligated. She insisted that if I didn't intervene, she and her new husband would be saddled with her enormous loan for years, which would decimate their financial stability. She explained that he already had student debt of his own, and she couldn't bear the thought of dragging him down with her burdens. Yet, from my vantage point, there wasn't a single solid reason for me to approach my ex-husband, the man who had done everything in his power to make my life difficult. It just seemed like stepping back into a toxic battlefield that I had spent years trying to escape. In response, I gently suggested that if she truly wanted to spare her husband from the added strain of her debt, she could find a job and shoulder her share of the responsibility, instead of expecting everyone else to magically step in. I tried to reassure her that although this situation was undeniably tough, it wasn't an apocalyptic scenario. People handle student loans every day by working hard and adjusting their lifestyles. But my attempt to soothe her seemed only to pour fuel on the fire, causing her to lash out again, insisting that it was my duty to settle her debt. She went so far as to blame me for causing her father to cut her off in the first place, implying that if I hadn't interfered, her father would still be supporting her. By this stage in our argument, my frustration was off the charts. I finally snapped and demanded she reflect on whether she had honestly expected to live off her father's bank account for the rest of her life, without ever taking charge of her own financial independence. I also reminded her, as calmly as my temper would allow, of all the times I had gently cautioned her against enrolling in a high-tuition university, warning that she might suffer financially down the road, especially given that her father's solution was for her to sign a loan agreement rather than paying it directly himself. Whenever I tried to delicately bring up the benefits of finding employment and fully utilizing her expensive degree, she would blow up at me. She even iced me out for days on end whenever she felt that I was undermining her choices, forcing me to grovel just to restore communication. The painful irony was that these confrontations kept happening after she resumed contact post-graduation. It was as if every time I tried to do my duty as a parent, warning her of potential pitfalls, she would see it as an attack. But now she was blaming me for the very things I had tried to help her avoid. Eventually, I said what I believe needed to be said. She was an adult now, and it was high time she took responsibility for her own decisions and the consequences that accompanied them. I also pointed out, with a bit of anger coloring my words, that in her eyes, I was apparently a pathetic nobody with no real resources or power, so there wasn't much I could do to bail her out anyway. She retorted by accusing me of being spiteful, and mean-spirited for even referencing her cruel remarks from the previous night. Her insults only hardened my resolve, and so I ended the call abruptly. Feeling drained and hurt on a profound level, I decided not to attend the wedding at all. I switched off my phone to avoid further drama, wanting only to escape the avalanche of negativity that seemed to pour from every interaction with her. I'll admit I used severe language with her, but to be perfectly honest, the release I felt afterward was immense. These were sentiments I had suppressed for years out of motherly love, never wanting to retaliate or speak unkindly to my own child. Repeatedly, she'd tossed out hurtful slurs, and I just swallowed them, hoping that patience and unconditional love would eventually soften her edges. In hindsight, maybe I should have asserted myself sooner, yet, through it all, I did my utmost to ensure she understood how precious she was to me and that I'd always be by her side if she needed me. That's why it cut me so deeply when she had the audacity to phone me right after labeling me a pathetic nobody, and show no intention of apologizing for that deliberate blow. She even managed to twist her vicious words so that I somehow bore responsibility for her outburst, which frankly was both staggering and maddening. When I finally turned my phone back on the following day, it was flooded with a barrage of text messages and missed calls, mostly from my daughter and extended family members. Many of them were already aware of the long-standing challenges I faced in raising her. My daughter's stance was that I had behaved unforgivably by refusing to assist her during her financial crisis, and by missing her wedding, which she claimed irreparably spoiled her special day. Word had spread among our relatives, and people were taking sides. Some of my kin, especially those closest to me, offered sympathy and stood behind my actions once they understood the gravity of the situation. Others, connected more closely with my ex-husband's circle, condemned me as a cold, unloving mother who had chosen the worst possible time to abandon her daughter. I found myself in a state of utter confusion and guilt, torn between feeling relieved that I'd finally set boundaries and worrying that I was now failing my own child in her time of need. There's a conflicted duality swirling inside me. On one hand, there's immense relief in finally having the courage to stand up for myself, for once, not bending over backward out of fear that I'd lose my daughter if I didn't. Yet, on the other hand, the knowledge that she's so upset, and that I might not be able to ease her financial burden crushes me. Hearing her voice tremble with distress when she pleaded with me was genuinely excruciating, and a part of me yearns to be her rescuer. But my own income, which hovers around $40,000 a year, doesn't allow for big gestures, like paying off a large student loan. It leaves me feeling cornered, wondering if I should just swallow my pride and attempt to reason with my ex-husband, maybe appeal to him to show some mercy, or at least partial help. I have no illusions that we'll get along, but for the sake of my daughter's well-being, I might be willing to endure any awkwardness. Still, I'm all at sea about how I'm supposed to feel, or what the right approach is. I've tried calling and texting my daughter to reconcile, but she's not answering, and it's making me feel more monstrous by the day. Was I truly in the wrong to enforce my boundaries and skip her wedding? Or was it an act of self-preservation? I'm torn up, and I'd be so appreciative of any advice from others who might see this from a different perspective. Hello everyone. Before I dive into what happened next, I want to begin by expressing how grateful I am for the outpouring of responses to my initial account. I never expected so many people to read and react to my story, and I'm deeply thankful for the supportive, caring, and validating messages you've shared. The comfort I've felt from knowing strangers on the internet empathize with me is indescribable. Before providing the most recent developments, I want to respond to some recurring questions people posed. The first, which many of you asked, is whether I recognize just how spoiled my daughter truly is. And yes, I can regrettably confirm that I am fully aware of her level of entitlement. It does frustrate me, and I understand it can be equally maddening to read about how she has behaved. Some folks recommended I cut her off completely. But for me, the situation is far more nuanced. She's still my child. I was the one who carried her in my womb for 9 months and nurtured her into existence. It's incredibly difficult for me to walk away from her, regardless of her flaws. I see plainly that she's not always kind, but I just can't bring myself to abandon her when, in my mind, I still love her deeply. The second question people had was about the reason behind my divorce from my ex-husband, whether it involved cheating or if there was some other factor that led to our split. Without dragging all my private history into the open, I'll simply say that our divorce was very bitter. My daughter's father was not a supportive or loving partner to me, and after enduring quite a bit, I reached a point where I had to leave. Unfortunately, he was furious at my choice and decided to wage a kind of war against me in the aftermath. He fought tooth and nail for full custody of our daughter, going as far as analyzing my every move to see if he could spin it against me in court. Not long after we ended our marriage, he married a model, which he clearly used as a way to flaunt his improved life in front of me. While he didn't often attack me verbally to our daughter, his behavior and gestures spoke volumes. He made it very evident he wanted to hurt me any way he could, leaving a toxic trail that inevitably affected our child. The third question concerns my feelings toward my daughter's stepmother, whether I harbor hate toward her. In truth, I wouldn't say I hate her, rather, I find our relationship to be extraordinarily complicated. She's typically pleasant enough to my face, but I can't help sensing that her politeness is rooted in condescension or pity. Frankly, I'm not overly bothered by my ex-husband's romantic life or his pursuit of happiness. The real tension arises from the way his new wife took it upon herself to become the primary mother figure for my daughter, effectively stepping into my role in a way that frequently undermined my own parenting. Early on, she even asked me to relinquish my parental rights, so that she could adopt my daughter as her own legal child. While she didn't become angry when I refused, she later told my daughter that I was rejecting the opportunity for her to have another mother in her life. Although she eventually explained that she didn't intend to poison my daughter against me, the damage was already in motion. Beyond that, she often engaged in what felt like a perpetual competition, trying to outdo me whenever I did something for my daughter, or whenever I laid down any rules, or tried a disciplinary measure like grounding. She would override me and proclaim that my daughter had the freedom to do whatever she wanted. My ex-husband openly supported these actions, finding them entertaining and gleefully reminding me that, in his eyes, his wife had an equal claim to motherhood. No, she wasn't overtly nasty to me, but she created roadblocks that made motherhood an uphill climb. Even when she contributed to my daughter cutting all ties with me for 4 years, I never developed a true hatred for her. If I must point fingers, I place the blame on my ex-husband, who orchestrated most of this as part of his personal vendetta against me for breaking our family. My only hope is that my daughter will come to see the bigger picture one day. It took about a week before my daughter finally responded to my attempts to contact her. When she picked up my call, I felt an overwhelming surge of relief, though she was quite cold toward me at first. It was only when I mentioned that I might speak to her father on her behalf that her tone suddenly shifted, and she began to sound more engaged. Many of you had advised me to hold my ground and stay away from my ex-husband, but I had a change of heart. Despite the newfound clarity and boundaries I'd established with my daughter, I recognized that she still needed my help. Putting personal pride aside, I made it clear to her that my only motivation in talking to her father was my genuine concern for her well-being. I told her that her debt, as large and frightening as it was, mattered less to me than her emotional state, that I just wanted her to be safe and not feel abandoned. That was the moment she broke down in tears and apologized for her previous cruelty, admitting that her marriage was already hanging by a thread. I was stunned. It had only been a couple of weeks since the wedding. She explained that her husband was unhappy about the enormous loan she had accrued, as they had made all sorts of plans for post-wedding life, purchasing a house, starting a family, and all of that was now on hold, possibly forever, due to her crushing debt. He was apparently considering leaving her rather than being saddled with a financial burden that might derail all his dreams. My heart ached for her, and for the first time, I sensed she was being genuine with me. I could hardly fathom the feeling of helplessness and betrayal she must have been experiencing, with one vital person after another closing doors on her. She had always relied on her father and stepmother, and suddenly that safety net was gone. I reassured her that I would do what I could to support her, although I didn't sugarcoat the reality. There was a real possibility her father might dismiss me outright. Whenever I brought this up, she tried to insist that her father still might listen, but I pointed out past situations where my opinions had been blatantly disregarded. Even so, I vowed to help her find her footing again, on the condition that she put forth genuine effort to secure what she was hoping to achieve in life. Mercifully, she appeared to grasp the gravity of what I was saying and agreed to comply with my suggestions if her father's response was as negative as I feared. She ended the call by sincerely thanking me, something I'd rarely heard from her, and though it was sad that it took such dire circumstances for us to reach this point, it also bolstered my determination to stand by her. This brings me to the present moment. I reached out to her father and requested we have a sit-down at his home over the upcoming weekend to discuss the situation. I harbor little optimism that he'll suddenly have a change of heart and resume helping our daughter with her financial responsibilities. Yet, in a way, all this turmoil has already proven to be a dramatic wake-up call for my daughter, forcing her to confront her own choices, as well as the reality that not everyone will rescue her. Whatever the outcome, I can see that she is slowly transforming into a person with deeper insight, and I cling to the hope that this turning point might guide her toward letting me back into her life in a more meaningful way. I would be incredibly grateful for any positive energy or good wishes. I promise to come back with another update after our meeting. I'm here with the outcome of the weekend. It was quite emotionally draining, so I needed a bit of time to process before sharing. On the day I was scheduled to meet with my ex-husband, my daughter insisted on joining me. I had mixed feelings about it, but ultimately decided her presence might be beneficial. She could hear everything firsthand, and maybe it would encourage her father to be more transparent. I drove to her apartment, picked her up, and we made our way to his place together. The moment we stepped inside, it was evident he had no intention of being welcoming. He barely acknowledged us, probably anticipating our agenda. His wife tried to put on a polite face, but the atmosphere was palpably tense. I broached the subject of my daughter's student loan, proposing a sort of compromise. Perhaps they could discontinue giving her the monthly allowance, but at least help settle, or significantly reduce her loan to prevent her from drowning in debt. They flatly refused. When my daughter chimed in, it only seemed to enrage her stepmother further. In a heated outburst, her stepmother unleashed a torrent of vitriol, saying she deeply regretted ever showing my daughter an ounce of kindness. She labeled my daughter as spoiled and described her as the worst thing that ever happened to her and my ex-husband. Then came the shocking admission that the only reason she had been decent toward my daughter was that she wanted to please my ex-husband. She revealed that she deliberately pushed those expensive college brochures on my daughter to get her out of state, believing this would be the ideal gift for my ex-husband. She went on to confess she had told my ex-husband she would treat my daughter amicably only until she got married, at which point they would sever all financial support, forcing her to handle things on her own. My ex-husband had apparently agreed to this plan, but somehow forgot about it later when he originally discussed paying off my daughter's student loan. Naturally, my daughter was devastated, and I felt awful for her. After the stepmother's rant, we left. My ex-husband showed no hint of remorse. In fact, I'd go so far as to say his expression conveyed relief, which made me boiling mad. However, my priority in that moment was comforting my daughter, so I bit my tongue. Once she'd calmed down to some extent, I dropped her off at her place. But within just a few hours, she called me again, crying hysterically. After I helped her settle down a bit, she told me her husband was planning to file for annulment, because he didn't want to be shackled to the enormous debt she carried. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't stand the thought of my daughter going through yet another significant loss. I rushed to her home and stayed with her, offering whatever comfort I could. We ended up talking well into the early hours of the morning, and though I deeply wish she hadn't had to endure such heartbreak, the silver lining is that it seemed to mend our bond. I'm not saying everything is magically perfect, but I can see genuine signs of growth in her. Yes, it's premature to declare she's completely changed, but my instincts tell me she's starting down a better path. That's the gist of what has unfolded so far. My plan is to stand by my daughter to the best of my capacity, help her cope, find resources, and encourage her to move forward with her life despite the enormous setbacks. I truly appreciate every comment, message, and bit of advice. It has meant more to me than words can fully convey. I promise to return with more news if anything major develops. For now, I'm taking it day by day, hoping to maintain stability for both of us. It's been about 4 months since my last message here, and quite a lot has transpired in that time. Honestly, I got so caught up in the whirlwind of events that I momentarily forgot about this platform. Today, as I finally got a moment of peace, I remembered my promise to come back and share a final update. After my daughter's husband informed her that he intended to file for an annulment, I stepped in right away, supporting her emotionally and trying to ease her through the chaos. Her husband actually did pack up and live in a hotel for the duration of the legal process, so he followed through on his decision. My daughter was in a truly dark place. She barely ate, seldom got out of bed, and cried continuously. Fearing for both her mental and physical health, I stayed close to her as much as I could, although it began taking a toll on me too. Desperate, I convinced her to seek therapy. She had not only the heartbreak of her marriage ending, but also the devastating revelation that her stepmother's affection was never genuine, along with lingering, unresolved issues from earlier in her life. Thankfully, therapy turned out to be a game changer. I saw noticeable progress in her mental state, and she even proposed that we attend family therapy sessions together. Words fail to describe how thrilled that made me. We've gone consistently, and I can honestly say our relationship has strengthened significantly, although I still carry some caution about the future. Once she started regaining her footing, I helped her find a decent job, nothing luxurious, but at least a way to become financially self-reliant and secure some stability. It requires long hours and lots of effort, and she certainly isn't living at the standard she was once accustomed to, but it's a foundational step in the right direction. I'm just relieved to see her learning to stand on her own 2 feet, even if that means enduring some exhaustion. She and I have grown incredibly close. I ended up living with her for 3 months straight to ensure she wasn't alone. This is the first month I haven't been with her day in and day out, but we still carve out time to see each other weekly and we chat on the phone daily. She's offered multiple heartfelt apologies for how she behaved throughout her adolescent years, and I'm grateful to see the sincerity behind those words. Regarding my ex-husband and his wife, I don't have many details. Word through the family grapevine is that he and S are at odds and currently living separately. Perhaps he feels a pang of guilt for what he did to our daughter, but instead of addressing it properly, he may be taking it out on the one person who's closest to him. Honestly, neither I nor my daughter can muster much sympathy for him. She's opted to cut him off entirely and wants nothing more to do with him. Despite the obstacles that still lie ahead, I'm beyond grateful to have my daughter truly back in my life. She's blossomed into a more empathetic, self-aware person, and I'm overjoyed that she's forging a new path, free from the shackles of her past mistakes. That's it for now. Thank you sincerely to everyone who invested time in reading this saga and offered guidance or comforting words. Your support has been an irreplaceable source of strength for me. I'm immensely appreciative.